podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to a new podcast, The Paddock and The Pavilion with Stephen Wallace. In each show, Stephen will interview someone connected to the world of horse racing or cricket.
Hello everyone. On today's podcast, I'm joined by best-selling crime author Felix Francis, the youngest son of the late Dick Francis, the famous author and champion jockey. Thank you for coming on the show, Felix.
Well, lovely to be here, Stephen. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And on today's podcast, we're going to talk about your new book, Iced, about growing up with a famous author, journalist and famous jockey, what goes into writing a crime novel, and an event that's coming up shortly at Newmarket at the Jockey Club rooms on Wednesday, the 8th of December. But let's start with your new book, Iced. You have been described by Country Life as the master of suspense and intrigue. Can you give listeners a brief outline about your new book?
Well, yes, I'll try. Without giving away any spoilers. Iced is... It starts with my main character, whose name is Miles Pussett. He is going down the Cresta Run in St. Moritz. He used to be a jockey, a steeplechase jockey, but he got a bit heavy, and the weight problems, and he had mental health problems, took a bit to drinking, and had to step away from racing really for the sake of his mental health, and now gets his thrills by chucking himself down an ice chute at 80 miles an hour with no brakes and no steering, which is the Cresta Run, which is very exciting. I went and watched it. I didn't actually go down it myself. I'm not that brave, but not at my age. And he gets drawn into horse racing again because he's competing in a competition at the Cresta on the same weekend as White Turf. And White Turf is the most amazing horse racing actually on the lake, on the frozen lake at St. Moritz. And that is why I went to St. Moritz in the first place, and was to see I was invited by White Turf to attend. And he gets drawn back into horse racing, and he begins to discover things going on which have resonating with his former life. And the book is actually written in two time zones, intermingled, one in the present tense and one in the past tense. And I set myself a task to do that, and I'm really delighted by the outcome. And I think that readers will enjoy it. And it is, Country Life are very nice to say that the master of suspense, and certainly there's quite a lot of suspense in this book.
Well, having read your book, Crisis, I know they're a real page turner. How do you get your ideas, and how do you get the idea for this book?
Well, the idea for Iced came from the fact that I went to St. Moritz as a guest to go and see White Turf. I mean, I went there with the specific reason that it was unusual racing, to see horses racing actually on the ice. And A, I wanted to actually see it for myself. And B, I did think that it might provide the background for a book. But while I was there, I have a friend who lives in the same village as me, and he used to ride the Cresta Run himself when he was in the RAF. And he said, "Oh, you must go and look at the Cresta if you're in St. Moritz." Well, I thought I probably wouldn't have time. And we stayed in a hotel, and there was a notice saying what was on the Cresta Run every day. And it says, "Today, Grand National." And I'm thinking, the Grand National, this takes place at Aintree in April. Anyway, I went to the concierge and I said, "Where is the Cresta Run?" He said, "It's about 250 metres down the road." So I thought, well, I might just manage that. So I went down there, and sure enough, there was a competition going on called the Grand National. And I went in and I even met someone I knew there who happens to be president of the club. So he showed me around and everything. And by lunchtime that day, I had the formation of the story, the basis of the story in my head. It was absolutely magnificent. I mean, finding stories is not easy. some people even say to me, how many stories did your father actually leave you when he died? And the answer, of course, is he didn't leave any. And he didn't even give me the stories that I was using beforehand. So finding the story is always difficult. It's the most difficult thing is finding the story. And because not only can I not use any of my previous 15 stories that I've used in books, but I can hardly use any of the ones that my father has used previously, because everyone would then complain that the story is not original.
It must have been the word Grand National that must have inspired you with the connection with the Francis family. Oh,
absolutely. Well, my father rode in 8 Grand Nationals. He never actually won it, but he came very close on Devon Loch.
He certainly did, yeah.
In 1956, all but 40 yards of the run-in, when the horse collapsed underneath him. The horse recovered, and he rode him again later in the year. But it was a great shock and a great disappointment to him at the time. But probably, as he always said in later life, he probably owed more to Devon Loch's collapse than he would have done if the horse had won, because it was that one singular event which resulted in him writing and going on to be a newspaper man, and then going on to write so many best-selling novels. So, he used to say at one point that his gravestone, his epitaph, would be, "Here lies the man who didn't win the Grand National." But actually, it says, "Here lies the man who wrote 39 best-selling novels and introduced more people worldwide to horse racing than any other single individual." So actually, the Grand National, it was very close to his heart. And indeed, he became a trustee of the racecourse when there was an appeal launched in 1982 to save the racecourse from being turned into a housing estate. And my father was one of the 2 original trustees, and he went on being a trustee for the next 21 years. And with great excitement for me and my brother, Aintree are installing a statue of my father, a life-size statue, at the racecourse, just outside the weighing room, the new weighing room, which he actually opened in 2006. And it's a great honour for us to have a statue going up there. And the statue is at the moment being cast. And the plan is that it will be unveiled at next year's Grand National meeting in April.
Oh, that's fantastic. I've been to the Grand National about nearly 10 times myself, so I know where you're talking about, the new weighing room. So that will be a fantastic tribute to your father.
Yes, he will be standing. He's actually depicted as a jockey, as he was in 1956 when he rode Devon Loch, and he'll be standing at the top of the steps overlooking the parade ring. And it's very exciting. I think it's the most wonderful honour that Aintree are offering him. We've raised the money through public subscription and a number of large donors, including my brother and myself. So we have raised the money. The money is there. The statue is been sculpted by William Newton, who did Lester Piggott and did all the sculptures of Lester Piggott there are around the country, and a number of other, important equestrian-based sculptures. And he's done a wonderful job. And it's, as I said, it's being cast at the moment into bronze. And all being well, it will be standing proud at Aintree come after next April.
Well, that's something to look forward to, and hopefully, fingers crossed, there are going to be big crowds back at Aintree for the Grand National in April.
Well, I hope so. The current pandemic is very worrying, especially what's happening across Europe. I just hope that people get themselves vaccinated, get their boosters, and we put this awful year behind us.
How have sales been going for the book?
Sales have been pretty good, actually. They're up on Guilty Not Guilty, which was my previous book. So publishers seem very happy. I'm working now on the next one. I'm a quarter of the way through the next book, desperately trying to think of the story as I go along. As my father used to say, it's a funny way to make a living, making up stories, but that's what we do. We're in the entertainment business. So sales are good. I went to an event on Monday here in Oxfordshire, where I live, where in fact it was in Warwickshire, and there were 75 people there, and I did a talk to them, and I managed to sell 31 books. So, considering that a lot of them were there as couples, I thought I'd done quite a good success rate, a hit rate of selling a book to people. But and I'm looking forward to coming to
Newmarket.
Newmarket, to the Jockey Club rooms on Wednesday, the 8th of December, where there is a wonderful tour that Discover Newmarket do, which is the Dick Francis tour around the town, showing where places are in my books and my father's books. And I've been asked to join the tour. I know that Sandy, the tour guide, is mugging up on everything because she's terrified that I will point things out to her that she gets wrong, which I promise her not to. And then after the tour, we have tea in the Jockey Club rooms, and then I'm doing a talk, and we'll be telling people about what it was like to grow up with Dick Francis, and how I write the books, and how I took over the Dick Francis books. And also I'll be book signing there, and I hope a lot of people will come along and listen.
The tour starts at 3:45. Price is £15, and you get a chance to get a signed copy of the book. That's obviously extra, but you can book via discovernewmarket.co.uk or telephone Newmarket, which is 01638 501122. So I look forward to seeing him myself at the audience on Wednesday, the 8th of December.
Yes, I hope that lots of people will come. It is, and I know it's quite an expensive trip, but I'm not getting the money there. It's going to hire the Jockey Club rooms, and the Jockey Club rooms themselves are worth the £15 entrance just to go and have a look at the artwork there.
Definitely.
And I'm greatly looking forward to it. And I had spoken there once before in the coffee room there, but that was many, many years ago, and it was for another charity. So I'm greatly looking forward to it, and I hope that people listening to this podcast will come along and listen to me then. I assure you that you won't be disappointed.
Well, not wanting to give away too many secrets, but I did want to ask you, what was it like growing up with a world-famous author, an ex-royal jockey, and a racing journalist? Did you, when you were younger, go to the races? And did you ride yourself?
Oh, I went to the races every Saturday. And with my father, we all did. I mean, my brother and I did, and my mother used to go along as well. I don't remember my father riding. He not riding races. I remember him riding horses, but not riding races because he retired when I was just 4 years old, and I have no real memory of him riding. In fact, sadly, the only film I have of him riding in a race is that ill-fated 1956 Grand National when Devon Loch collapses. So, but it was great. I mean, people often ask me, what is it like to have a famous father? And my answer to that is, what is it like not to? Because my father was champion jockey the year I was born. So he was already fairly famous certainly in racing terms, but it was the Devon Loch episode that thrust the name Dick Francis from the back pages to the front pages of the newspapers. But growing up in what I call one of the great fiction factories of the 20th century was certainly different. I mean, as I've been quoted saying often, the discussion over the breakfast table between my parents wouldn't be which of them was doing the school run and taking the boys to school today. It would be whether Sid Halley could survive the night with a 38 slug in his guts, with his blood dripping through a crack in the linoleum floor, or whether or how much explosive is actually required to bring down an aeroplane or to blow up a house. And those sort of things. I mean, it was the family business. I mean, my mother used to call it a cottage industry without the cottage. And I wrote my first part of a Dick Francis novel when I was a 17-year-old A-level physics student, when I designed the bomb that blew up the remote control bomb that blew up an aeroplane in Rat Race. And of course, in those days, it wasn't really electronics. It was all solenoids and batteries. The remote controls were not easy. So everyone is now so used to using their remote control to work the television or to open the garage doors. But in those days, designing a remote control to blow up a bomb at a distance was quite fun. And in fact, we made the device in my school science lab. I mean, not the bomb, not the explosive. Didn't have the explosive, but the remote control bit about how you would detonate the explosive if you had the explosive. And so my A-level physics teacher and I set to work making. It was a great project for us, and so that was the first bit I did, and then
because I was going to ask you how a physics graduate who was then taught advanced level physics sort of got into the sort of family writing business, but you actually started it before you even finished school.
Yes, I did, and there was a book my father produced in. I think it was 1981, or it might have been 1980, called Twice Shy. And I wrote the computer program in it. I mean, it was very cutting edge at the time, but now it is so out of date, it's really rather embarrassing. I mean, one of the things is that we were still using dial-up and cassette tapes for computer programs. You know, that whine, you probably don't even remember the whining noise when you played it on a cassette player. If you had a computer program, and it just sounded like a whining. And I know it's out of date because my daughter said to me one day, "Dad, what's a cassette?" So you realise that life moves on. But it was a fun time. I also did quite a lot of the meteorology because I studied meteorology at university. A lot of the meteorology in Second Wind. So I'd done quite a few bits of Dick Francis books over the years.
And you first got involved in writing them directly with your father in, is it 2007 with Dead Heat?
Well, actually, it was 2006 with Under Orders, even though at the time I wasn't allowed to say so. Taking over was a bit of an accident, really, because I was a physics school teacher, an A-level physics teacher for 17 years, and then I left teaching and went into business, and I was deputy chairman of a company called World Challenge Expeditions Limited, which sent young people all over the world. It was very much a company which was involved in leadership training. Great company. I really thought it was a super company, and we sold the company in 2005. And in 2005, my father's literary agent asked me to go and have lunch with him. It was not unusual. I was managing my father's business affairs anyway. My father and mother worked on the books together. That's the best known secret, the worst kept secret in publishing. And sadly, my mother died of a heart attack in the year 2000. And my father announced that he was retiring. He was 80 years old, and he was going to retire. And everyone thought that was that. Well, in 2005, my father's literary agent had lunch with me, and he said, "Felix, we have a real problem, and that is your father's books are all going to go out of print. It's not that the stories aren't good enough. They're great stories, but there are 1,000 books published in this country every week. There are 50,000 a year. And that doesn't include the self-published books. And the bookshops simply don't have room for the old books as well as the new books. So, and everyone is forgetting. There hasn't been a new book for 5 years, and everyone is forgetting. And I thought, well, it is a problem, because I'd hoped that they would provide my father with a pension for the rest of his life, and I quite hoped that they'd provide me with one too. And it clearly wasn't going to happen. So what the agent said, what we need is a new hardback, a new book, a new Dick Francis. And I sort of looked at him and I thought, you're crazy. My mother and father worked on them together. My mother's been dead 5 years. My father, well, God bless him, I loved him dearly. He was 85 years old by this stage, and he really could hardly remember what he had for breakfast, let alone enough to write a book. So I said, well, it's not going to happen. And the agent said, no, well, actually, what I'm asking you is your permission to ask an existing established crime writer if he will write a Dick Francis novel by whoever. Well, I must have had a few glasses of red wine by that stage, and I said to him, well, before you ask anyone else, I would like to have a go. I'd written bits of Dick Francis books. I'd helped my parents finish the last book, Shattered, and I'd effectively written the last quarter of that. So I said, and the agent, he didn't roll his eyes or laugh and think, how does a physics teacher, how do you think you can write a book worthy of the name Dick Francis? He simply said, I'll give you 2 months to write 2 chapters and then we'll see.
Bit of pressure there.
Well, he openly admits that then we'll see meant that I'd give him the permission he was seeking to ask someone else. So I went home, I told my wife, and she encouraged me, and I sat down and I wrote 2 chapters. They were long chapters. They ended up being 4 chapters. And I sent them back in, and we had another lunch, and he said, well, there's 2 things you've got to do. One, you've got to... One is you've got to get on and finish it, and secondly, you better go and talk to your father. Well, the first one was easier than the second, but eventually my father read my chapters. He liked it, and the book came out called Under Orders. It came out as a Dick Francis novel. Didn't have my name on it anywhere. I wasn't allowed to say that for 8 years, but I'm now able to say it because I've been released from that clause of the contract. And the book sold. Well, of course it sold. It went straight to the top of the bestseller list on both sides of the Atlantic. But I was terrified that the Sunday newspaper reviews after it came out would all say that Dick has lost it. But they didn't. They all said the master is back. And the publisher said, well, we want another one. So I set to work on Dead Heat, which was a chef, again set it around Newmarket. And, well, that was also going to go out as a Dick Francis novel, but the American publishers decided that they were frightened that they might get sued if anyone knew that Dick Francis hadn't written it, even though Dick Francis is more of a brand, in my view, than a named individual. And so it had Dick Francis, with Dick Francis in enormous letters on the front, and underneath in the smallest font they could find, and Felix. And gradually over the years, my name got bigger and his got smaller. But Iced was my 15th novel, and I'm now working on number 16.
And talking of Newmarket, I mean, I've read Crisis. Did you probably know Newmarket quite well anyway, but did you come and visit? I mean, you feature the Bedford Lodge, Tattersall's, where one of the main stars works, the Bury Road, where one of the trainers' stables is. Did you come and visit and ask lots of questions at Newmarket?
I did. I mean, I've been to Newmarket quite a few times over the years. I was, because I've set, as I say, I set Dead Heat in Newmarket, in and around Newmarket as well. And of course, Newmarket is known as headquarters for horse racing. So if you're going to write horse racing books, you can't not write them in Newmarket. I mean, I've written books based around Lambourne, currently writing a book which is based around Middleham in North Yorkshire, which is another racing centre. But certainly there have been a number around Newmarket, in quite a lot of my father's books as well. In particular, Bone Crack was set in Newmarket. And yes, when I wrote Crisis, I did come back to Newmarket. I mean, I'd been there before. I blew up the grandstand at the Rowley Mile racecourse in dead heat.
I'm sure they like that.
Yeah, well, they do quite like. They thought they did. I went back to the racecourse there recently. I realised that I'd changed quite a lot, and it certainly wasn't blown up when I went back. However, for Crisis, I needed to find a stable yard who would look after me and show me the ropes. So, on the basis that if you want the best information, you go to the best yard, I rang up John Gosden and asked him if I could come and spend some time at his yard, spend a day or two with him, and he readily agreed. So I went and spent some time with John and went out on the gallops with him, both at Warren Hill and over by the racecourse on the heath there, and I stayed at the Bedford Lodge, and the stable yard that I use in
exactly, we get fires there, don't we? Yeah.
In Crisis, which actually is the one that burnt down. Well, part of it burnt down. It doesn't actually exist. It was I sort of slotted it in between the Bedford Lodge Hotel and Luca Kamani's old place. But I found out recently that Luca Kamani had a fire in his stables at one stage, and all the horses in his stables were taken out of the stables and tied up on the severals, just as I'd written in the book, and I didn't know that beforehand. It's very strange how sometimes you write things only to find out that what you've written is either happens or has happened in the past and you didn't know it.
And did you also go to Tattersall's?
I did. I've been to Tattersall's a few times. My brother has for many years has owned and run Lambourne Racehorse Transport, LRT. He was a trainer himself in Lambourne, and he has an office at Tattersall's because he organises transport for all the horses after they've been sold, all those going back towards Lambourne. So I've spent some time with him there, and I spent some time actually at the sales, watching sales. And when I needed particular information for Crisis, I rang them up. And the nice thing is that everybody knows that neither Dick Francis nor I ever hold racing up in a bad light. There are some individuals that you hold up in a bad light, but racing itself comes out pretty well. And that means that everyone is very helpful, and Tattersall's were great. And in fact, I was back in Newmarket only a couple of weeks ago, and I was back at Tattersall's doing some filming, which hasn't yet been broadcast, but will be, I hope so. We hope soon. So it was great fun to go to Tattersall's and hear some of the stories. I went there on sale days, and I went round and had a good look round everywhere when the sales were not on. And it's important to get things like that right. I know it's a fictional work, but if you have to do your research to make, because if you get something which is obviously wrong, then you tend to put off the readers who know the right answer. So I work very hard. I still get things wrong. I got something wrong in Iced, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
And does the research almost take the longest? You have to do all the research before you start writing the book?
No, well, I actually don't. I tend to do the research as I'm writing the book, because I don't plan the whole book out ahead of time, because the characters tend to take on a life of their own and tend to drive the book in one direction or the other. If I'm lucky, I have an idea for a good beginning. And if I have an idea for a good beginning, I write the beginning and just see where it goes. Writing books is, if you waited until you got inspiration, you'd never get it started. It's a job of work. You have to sit down and get on with it. And the most important thing is in the story, you have to make the reader care about what happens to the characters. You don't necessarily need to like them. Some of the times you want them to care about what happens to the bad guys. You want them to feel that what is going to happen to the bad guys is they get their comeuppance or whatever. But they've got to care about what happens to the characters, the good ones and the bad ones. And if they don't care about what happens to them, they'll read 2 or 3 chapters, they'll put the book down and never pick it up. And to that end, your character has to go on a bit of a journey, an emotional journey, a practical journey sometimes, where they are changed, their perceptions and life is changed by the processes of the book, so they end up being a different person at the end than they are at the beginning, because in that way your reader is wanting to know what happens to them. And certainly in Iced, there are a number of different journeys going on that the character makes, emotional journeys and so on. And I hope that I've made it so that people really want to know what happens to him in the end. That is the only way that you'll get people to go on reading the books, or in the case of a film or a television series, they want to know what happens at the end. And if they don't like the characters and they don't care what goes on, what happens to them, they may watch the first 2 episodes and then they won't bother with the rest. We've all been there.
Yeah, I can certainly vouch for that. I've written Crisis. I must now read Iced. And when I was reading Crisis, I found myself reading I'll read a couple of chapters now before I go to bed. And then I was looking at my watch and thinking, I've read about 6 chapters and now it's 1:05 and I really ought to switch the light off, So hopefully when I get Iced, I'll get the same page-turning experience.
Well, I hope so too. It is nice for an author when a reader says, I took your book to bed with me last night and I was up until 5 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't put it down. And then it gives you a warm feeling that you've done a good job. But then the second feeling comes in and says, oh my God, it took me a whole year to write that and they've read it in one night. But that is what we're after. And in Crisis, I enjoyed writing Crisis because I get a number of people who say to me, I don't read your books or your father's book because I don't like horse racing, or I don't like horses, or I don't know anything about horses. I mean, the answer is they're not about horses, they're about people. Racing is simply the canvas against which I paint the story. And I decided that in Crisis, my main character wouldn't like horse racing. He gets forced into, by his job, into going up to find out what happened in a stable yard which had burnt down. But he doesn't really like the idea of it. He doesn't know. He tends to believe that the definition of a horse is that both ends are dangerous and the middle is uncomfortable. And so I enjoyed that little aspect of racing. That I made a character who didn't like racing and being forced to go and investigate it. It adds a little bit of fun, and I mean, after all, you want your readers to have fun. Well, you've got to have a bit of fun writing it too. Certainly.
Well, I certainly enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to meeting you in person on the Wednesday, the 8th of December, at the Jockey Club rooms. Again, an audience with Felix Francis. You can book online at discovernewmarket.co.uk. The price is £15. I know you're looking forward to going to the Jockey Club rooms, and that's also featured in Dick Francis and possibly Felix Francis books already.
Well, certainly it was in the Jockey Club rooms were included in Bone Crag. Of course, in those days, the Jockey Club used to be. The Jockey Club now is basically a landowner. It owns race courses and it owns the gallops at Newmarket as well as the Jockey Club rooms. But back in the time my father was writing, the Jockey Club was responsible for was the overriding authority and was responsible for disciplinary matters. And the Jockey Club rooms, there was there was a room in the inquiry room in the Jockey Club rooms in Newmarket. It had a horseshoe-shaped table, and it still has a horseshoe-shaped table, and the stewards would sit around this table, and the poor miscreant would have to stand in the jaws of this table to learn their fate. And they would have to stand there on a piece of carpet, a small square of carpet. And that's where the term to be carpeted comes from. And it is to be carpeted, meaning to be told off, and they would have to stand there and learn their fate from the assembled stewards, who had the ability to take away their livelihood. And at the time, I know that they did eventually allow legal representation, but at the time it was in Newmarket. The stewards were the kings. They were the gods of racing, and they didn't have to explain their actions to anybody. And so the Jockey Club rooms have great historical significance for horse racing, and I know I look forward to people coming and listening to me, but also just to be in those amazing places where so much of horse racing history of horse racing has been written over the years is worth the entrance money on its own, I'm sure.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your memories of your father, the Grand National. Look forward to the statue being unveiled next April. I did look up, and although he's obviously remembered for Devon Loch in 1956, as you say, he was champion jockey, and he was also second in the Grand National in 1949. So he came close in 1949.
He came closer than you think, actually, Stephen, because in 1948 he was working for George Owen, a trainer up in Cholmondeley in Cheshire. And one night my father was going around the stable yard late at night, and he found a horse down in its box with colic. And he spent the night, he sent for the vet and roused the stable lads, and they spent the night getting this horse up on its feet. And my father spent the whole night walking it round and round and round until the colic eased. Well, that was in October 1948. And in 1949, he rode the Grand National on Roymond. As you say, he came second. And the horse that beat him was the horse he saved the life of 5 months before. And my father was asked to say a few words at the party that night. It was held in Chester to honour the victory of a horse called Russian Hero. And he recounted the story of how he'd saved this horse's life the previous October, and he finished with the words, "If I'd known what that horse was going to do to me today, I'd have let the bugger die." So he came closer than you think to winning it on Roymond. The trouble was that Roymond was carrying top weight and Russian Hero was bottom weight, and so there was a 2-stone difference, and that's why Russian Hero was able to hang on to win against Roymond. So he came very close to winning it twice.
It seems that the Felix family is always associated with stories.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I could keep going, but I won't, because I think you've heard enough.
Anyway,
and I want to save a few for the Jockey Club rooms.
Certainly, yes. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the Paddock and the Pavilion.
That's my pleasure, Stephen. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Paddock and the Pavilion. You can download the show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at The Pad and Pav.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
At Blackpack, we're building a movement to grow Black political power. We've been at the forefront of change, using the power of political engagement to reshape our economic, justice, and political system. Our dedication shines through every election as we rally Black voters to the polls, propelling leaders that represent us into office. We're building a lasting impact and a political home for our community with a commitment to Black voters that go beyond the ballot. Visit blackpack.com today.